We are about to review one of the greatest books ever written by one of the greatest writers who has ever walked the face of planet Earth. Are you excited? Because I'm excited. If you're not excited, you're about to get excited. Hang on. Ladies, gentlemen, and everyone in between, welcome back to another episode of Books and Buds, where we discuss two of the greatest things on planet Earth, books and buds. So, as I mentioned, we're going to be discussing one of the greatest books ever written. It is The Grapes of Wrath, by my personal favorite author, John Steinbeck. Now, if you're a fan of this channel, you've been following me for a little while, you might have seen my video where I covered Tortilla Flat. That's my personal favorite book by him, but I know that's not a very popular opinion. Grapes of Wrath is, generally speaking, everyone's favorite book by him, and it's heralded as one of the best books ever written. Alright, before we get into that, let's talk about weed. This is a channel called Books and Buds. We just finished a run of Sour Bubble. We finally brought it back, and everyone loves the hell out of it. So, just want to quickly show you guys a little bit of what I'm talking about. Just look at the colors on that. She's gorgeous. It's no wonder everyone loves her so much. Have a look. It's beautiful. Absolutely gorgeous. Also, my novel, Corpse Lily, is coming out soon, so before we get into The Grapes of Wrath, I'd just like to briefly ask you to keep an eye out for it. It's coming out in the fall of 2021. The advanced reader's copies have just been released, so it's time, and it's getting pretty exciting for me, so please, keep an eye out for it, and I'll be sure to alert you in future videos. As I mentioned earlier, I'm just a huge fan of John Steinbeck, so I'm very excited to get to this book. It was basically written in the times of the Great Depression, and back in the day, a lot of people were coming from the Midwest, like states like Oklahoma. That's where this family that The Grapes of Wrath follows came from. And it started off with this great ball of dust that just took over everything. The weather was just atrocious. And this is based on true stuff, too. This really happened. And the dust just prevented crops from growing. And with that said, the banks took over the properties. They just couldn't afford to let these families live and operate these farms anymore, which had been in the families for generations. And it caused a lot of rifts throughout these families. So the main family that we focus on is called the Joads. And this book was so important that music has been written about this book, about the Joads in particular. I'm sure you've heard of The Ghost of Tom Joad, first written by Bruce Springsteen and then covered by Rage Against the Machine. That's just one. But this book inspired a hell of a lot of art. So the Joads, in order to survive, they pack up everything they have all into one car, and then they have to trek all the way to California, where they heard the weather's nice, there's a chance for them. And basically all hell breaks loose on their way. The family gets separated and just falls apart. By the time they get there, they realize it's not as easy as they thought it was going to be. Now, I happen to love John Steinbeck so much that this particular book, I have probably about 4 or 5 copies of it. One of those copies just so happens to have been left as an heirloom from my grandmother. So she lived through the Great Depression, her and my grandfather. They were born in the early 1900s. My grandfather was born in 1918. I can't recall the year my grandmother was born, but they lived through it. So it's no wonder they had a book like that. But she had a first edition and she left behind to me. So she even had her name written on that very first blank page. Well, my brother's ex-girlfriend at the time decided that she needed to write a number down. So she grabbed the book, wrote it down on the same page that my grandmother had her name written on, and tore the page out of a first edition copy of The Grapes of Wrath. So needless to say, she's my brother's ex-girlfriend for that reason and many, many, many more. She was just unbelievable. I still get sad talking about that one. That's how much I love John Steinbeck. That's how much I value this book, The Grapes of Wrath. I've recommended it to just about anyone that wants to know what books to read. My buddy Brian, my fiance Patty, just everybody that I have a chance to talk to about this book should read it because it was just that sad. So on their way over to California, they run into all kinds of people who are in a similar situation, and it's just they keep meeting poor people that are just desperate and at the end of their rope. And it seems to be the common theme in this book that the only people that are willing to help other poor people are other poor people. You know, rich people, you know, I mean, I know it's just a book and everything else, but the general premise of the novel was rich people have to be out for themselves and poor people have to be out for themselves. And it was just a sad, sad book, the state of affairs. And a lot of the wealthy people who own these farms in California were taking advantage of these poor farm workers coming from the Midwest by offering them pretty much the lowest wages you could possibly pay somebody, starving wages, and people were fighting. People were absolutely fighting to get into these farms and to go pick peaches, to go pick whatever. And they were willing to work for even less and less and less than the people that were already working, and it just created a downward spiral to the point where at the end of the book, Tom Joad, he was the son that we first meet at the very beginning of the book. He just had enough, and he decided he doesn't even want to fight to survive anymore. He just wants to fight the system. So that was when he left the families. He was just going to go fight and just do whatever he could to make sure that these injustices didn't continue. He was my personal favorite character. Right at the beginning of the book, he gets out of prison. Now, he was in prison for murder because he was just a stand-up guy. He didn't murder this person because he just loved to kill people. He murdered this person because it was a matter of survival. He was doing the right thing. Anyways, he gets out of prison. He's hitchhiking. A truck driver picks him up, brings him home. When he meets his family, that's when he stumbles upon the situation where the farm is being taken over by the bank and they got to go. So it's a good thing he got released from prison when he did, or else he might have missed out on his family. Not that it mattered, because once they started going, the whole family fell apart anyways. It was insane, just what was going on. There was all these communities on the way along to the road to California. I think they were called Okies. I don't remember the Okie communities, but just a sad, sad story of just meeting people who were in similar situations and getting their backstories and what happened to them and just all the BS that happened along the way. Now, when I said earlier that only poor people help other poor people, the way this book ended was unbelievable. I'm sure you've probably read it, so I don't think I'm giving away too much, but if you haven't read it, you might want to skip the video about maybe 30 seconds because, all right, one of Tom Joad's sisters, now her husband actually had bailed on the family on the way, but she gave born to a stillborn baby during a flash flood. So her uncle decided to leave the baby in the flood and let it float downstream instead of giving it a proper burial, just so everyone could see how tragic this is, what's going on in the Midwest and in this country in general. And it just reminded me of that little boy who washed up along the shores, I forget which country, but he was a refugee. And it's like, has anything really changed? I mean, there's so many parts of this world where tragedy is still just commonplace. Children starving and dying on the way to find survival and find a better life. So the book ends with her having all this milk and no one to give it to. There's a starving old man in a shanty shed with his grandson. So she used her breast milk to feed this old man so he could survive, and that's what I'm talking about. Poor people take care of each other, and it's just, that's what it's all about. Sometimes you can only help the person sitting next to you. And I mean, geez, if that wasn't the most beautiful book ever written, I mean, God, I don't know what is, but it just touched me in such a serious way. But that's why I want to discuss this book today, because that's the importance of literature, is to get to the heart of these issues, and the best way to get to the heart of these issues to actually see the people who are living through them. You know, it's one thing to see a child washing up on shore in the news, but to actually create a character around that child, that really tugs at the heartstrings, and that's what it takes to make a difference sometimes. So it's no wonder John Steinbeck won the Nobel Peace Prize. Okay, with that said, everybody, you could have tuned into any book review channel, but for some reason you decided to tune into mine. And for that, I love the hell out of you guys. Stay cool. We'll talk to you next time.